Hello, my friends, and good morning, and welcome back to another video on the American Civil War. This is video number 2 in our series of, who knows, maybe 5, maybe 6 videos. I'm going to do a bunch of these to end the year in the 4th marking period. And hope all is well. Keep doing what you guys are doing. Keep learning as much as you possibly can. Today's video will be short. It'll be 15, 20 minutes, just some really simple, basic topics as we're slowly starting to dive into the Civil War here. You guys have done the reading on Abraham Lincoln. You have a good background on him. You know what the Union is. You know what the Confederacy is. You know the reasons why, the North and the South are now fighting the inevitable, massive, devastating Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Dred Scott case, South Carolina secedes. Last class, we talked about the Crittenden Compromise and how the Confederate States were excited. And they're ready to go. They're yeah, we're creating our own new nation here. Lincoln wants to preserve the Union to the best of his ability, calls it unconstitutional. South doesn't care too much. The 3630 line we discussed. Confederate flags. And then lastly, this is where we left off, the fall of Fort Sumter and how this is really what signaled the start, the official beginning of the Civil War, when the South, the Confederacy, attempted to take over this federal fort, and they did it after 34 straight hours of bombing it, of lighting it basically up with missiles and with bombs and with cannons and with sending many troops in, and eventually, Commander Anderson here had to unfortunately, give up, throw the towel in, and Fort Sumter fell to the Confederate Army. So this signals the start of it. And there's the fort. We talked about some of the states. And this is what you guys did. Today's Thursday. On Tuesday, you read a little bit about Lincoln. This is going to be the person that really, I guess you could say, conquers, dominates, really is involved the most and probably makes the biggest impact out of anybody on the Civil War. He's obviously the president of the United States, and he's the leader of the Union, and it's his job to try to preserve and glue back and slowly put the pieces back together of America, and to get and to guide the Union in the North through this really tough, difficult time where you have family members fighting against each other and you have a civil war where you've got your own country fighting. He's got probably the toughest task of any president, arguably, of course, in American history. And he's got a lot of childhood trauma, growing up, losing some family members, losing some siblings, losing one of his first wives. So, he had a very difficult upbringing, but he was strong. He was physically strong. He was 6'4" in a time where people weren't that tall. So a big, imposing figure with with an aura of confidence about him, and just a great leader, great man. Even though he, like I said, he dealt with a lot of problems. He dealt with depression for a really long time, and he did have some really difficult things. He was strong mentally. He was able to overcome them, and really just a tremendous leader. One of the best not only America's ever seen, but the world. Okay. Let's talk about choosing sides. So Lincoln now was scared. Here is our, map here of what the country looked like at the time. And you see a whole bunch of different colors here. Every map kind of has different colors. So in the South, which is represented as yellow here, those are the Confederate states. These are the ones that have already removed themselves from the Union. They say, we're out, we're starting our new country. They're slave states, they're out, okay? The blue, obviously up more north, would be the Union. Those are the ones that are working, obviously, with Lincoln, or working, with, the overall Union to preserve the Union. They're against slavery. And then once again, you have those border states that are teetering back and forth. What should we do? So the population in these green states is pretty much torn. The people there are torn themselves between, should we have slaves? Should we not? What should our decision be moving forward? These are big decisions. This is not like, do you want super salad at a restaurant? This is like, do you want to remove yourself from the country? No, yes or no. It's a huge decision that needs to be made. So Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, actually, which becomes a state in 1863, they basically separate from Virginia, which was a slave state, a Confederate state. Actually, the Confederate capital is in Virginia. The Confederate capital is actually Richmond, Virginia. West Virginia, they wound up separating, though, becoming their own state. Maryland, Delaware, these are all your border states in which, again, the population was maybe 50-50, 50% in support of slavery, the other 50 against. And that's not to say that in the Confederate states, let's use Georgia as an example, it's not like 100% of the people in Georgia supported the Confederacy, supported slavery. I would say a vast, strong majority of them did. But it's not like every single person living in the blue, supported the Union and were anti-slavery abolitionists. And it's not like every single person in yellow owned slaves or was Confederate. It was just that the vast majority was. Remember, majority typically rules. Okay. So Lincoln was scared of losing more states. He already lost 7, and then 4 more wind up seceding. So Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. That brings our total up to 11. Okay, now we have 11 states, 11 Confederate states. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 are now officially separated. And Lincoln's fear is like, damn, we're going to lose more states. What if Missouri goes? What if Kentucky goes? He's still confident that the North can win this war, but you don't want to see more states leaving. You don't want to see more states seceding. That just means more resources, more energy, more people. The more the merrier, right? The more states and people and resources you have on your side, the better. So Lincoln's fear of losing more states does become a reality. But some states, like we discussed, do remain divided: Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, and they wind up being, pretty much divided throughout the war, but they don't really wind up seceding. And they pretty much stay with the North, with the Union the whole time. And just to show you divisions, so on the right here is Abraham Lincoln's wife. Her name is Mary Todd Lincoln. So she was born in the South. Typically, as we know, Southerners believe in, supporting, for the most part, at this time, supporting slavery, against abolition. They're supporting the Confederacy, right? Mary Todd was born in the South. So she was raised around people that lived that Southern lifestyle. And she winds up, obviously, marrying Abraham Lincoln, who's opposing this tremendously. So Mary Todd had 4 brothers. Of those 4 brothers, 3 of them actually went to fight in the Confederate Army. So she's on Abraham's side, Abraham Lincoln's side, during the duration of the war, right? Going against the South. We want to defeat the South. We want to overcome them. But then in the back of her mind, she's thinking, well, if we defeat the South, 3 of my brothers have a pretty good chance of not necessarily making it. I should know this. I'm not positive what happened to her brothers in the war. Maybe we could look that up. But just know that families were torn apart. Obviously, the nation was torn apart in this literal civil war. I think I said this last time. You guys probably know someone, maybe a family member, a cousin or friend, anyone who lives in one of the states that used to be the part of the Confederacy. Imagine going to war and actually having to fight against these people. So it's very, very challenging, and a very divided nation. Okay. All right, guys. So we're going to do the northern advantages, and then we're going to do the southern advantages, and we'll call it a day. Just want to give you guys some background here. Okay. So who's going to win this war? Who's it going to be? Is it going to be the North? Is it going to be the South? I think we all sit here and we know the answer to that, right? But at the time period, obviously both sides were very, very confident. They didn't think the conflict was going to last that long. They were thinking, I think every war is like that. They're like, we'll go in there a couple of years and we'll be out. Almost like the war on terror after, the tragic attacks on 9/11. I think Americans thought, we're going to go into the Middle East. We're going to take care of business. We'll be out. Well, we still have troops stationed there, right? So everybody thinks wars are going to be quick and easy, but they wind up dragging on pretty long, like World War I with the trench warfare and with, the large stalemates. The Civil War, drags on for 4 brutal years, almost 700,000 deaths. But going into the war, both sides were confident, but it did look like a mismatch. It looked like if the Yankees were playing against a Little League team, it looked like, it looked just like a massive advantage for the North. The South did have advantages, though, but going into the war, many, many people thought, okay, I think the North should be able to take care of this rebellion pretty quickly. Okay, so take a look at some of the advantages here. One of the big ones was just people, just population. The North had 22 million people versus 9 million in the South. So the more the merrier, like we discussed, the more people, the more, again, I'm going to compare to World War I. Russia had a big advantage and were helpful in World War I because they just had such a huge population of people. And no matter how many people they lost, they just kept hurling them, throwing them into war. Here's more people. So the North had more than double of the South population. So that's a big advantage. And of those 9 million residents in the South, about 3 million of them were actually slaves. So take that into account when you're thinking about populations. 22 million versus really, even though some slaves actually were forced to fight in this war, really 22 million versus like 6 million. So big population advantage. That's a big one. Economic advantage. Think about the economic differences, right? The Civil War was not only fought based off should slavery be allowed, should it not. There were staggering differences between the way that Northerners lived and Southerners lived. The North had a lot of industry, factories, manufacturing, companies, businesses, where the South pretty much made all their wealth on what? You guys should know this. The South made their wealth on land, on slaves, on cotton farms, on rice, on indigo, on tobacco, growing in land. So the North had a huge economic advantage. 85% of factories of industry of resources belonged to the North, were residing in the North geographically. So when guns broke down, when ammunition was running low, when you needed better transportation, and basically anything that you need, any physical resource you need for the war, the North could just relatively easily and quickly replace it, which was a big deal, resupplying. Whereas the South was going to take longer because they didn't have all the factories. They can't just go into a factory and replace and create more shells and more bullets and more muskets and so on and so forth. So that's a big advantage for the North. Strangely here, another 22 and 9 number. So look at the third bullet point here, railroads. This is actually real. Hopefully it's now easy for you guys to remember. The population in the North, 22 million. They also had 22,000 miles of railroad. And again, a 9 for the South, 9 million residents in the South, 9,000 miles of railroad in the South. So ask yourself why railroads are important. Why is transportation important in a war? The North had not only just the industry and the population, they had a lot more railroad mileage, a lot more established, which was just a fantastic big advantage for the North. A Navy is huge. Ask yourself again, why is a Navy important in war? Why do you need a Navy? You want to, obviously at this time, the Civil War, there's no planes yet. Okay, there's no aerial assaults. There's nothing. That really doesn't happen again until World War I, 1914 through 1918. But in the 1860s, there's no planes. Okay, so you got to worry about two things, right? War on the land, war on the sea. Well, right off the bat, the North has a big advantage at the sea because they're the only ones with the Navy. Okay, the Navy remained loyal to the North. The South had to build their Navy up basically from scratch. Imagine that. Yeah, let's build a Navy. That's not an overnight task, right? So the Navy was a big Northern advantage. And then obviously, as we have discussed, the North already has a government, right? Now, Lincoln was so scared to lose Maryland. What's in Maryland, technically? Maryland, Virginia, more Maryland. Washington, D.C. If Lincoln in the North lost Maryland, one of those border states, right here, Washington, D.C. would be gone. If Washington, D.C. was gone, the North would have to make a new capital. Luckily, they didn't. They kept their capital in Washington, D.C., and they already had an established government, which was a big advantage, whereas, again, the South had to, remember, they're creating a new nation here, so they're brand new, and they had to deal with the struggles that the actual United States dealt with, in the late 1700s as a rebuilding country or as a building nation. So the North has all of this already established between the population, the economic advantage, the railroads, the Navy, and they already had that established working government where the South had to build from scratch. Okay. So here's the railroad systems, a lot out in what we used to call the Midwest territory. I say we as if I used to live back then. Of course I didn't. You could see that the amount of railroad mileage here in the North has a big advantage in that. Big for transportation. So a lot of really big advantages here in the North. Okay. Last thing for today, the Southern advantages. So, obviously the North seemed like they had some big ones, but, the South was not a pushover. This, again, was not going to be just a war that ended in a month or in a couple months or in a year. No, it was a war that dragged on for 4 years. So the South had to have something going for them, right? So big thing that they had going for them was that they basically could play, the South that is, a defensive war. Okay, they can basically dig in, hang out, kind of sit back, relax, and make the Union come to them, right? The South was happy with their new nation So all they needed to do was basically stay where they were. They could fight on their own land. That's a geographic advantage as well. But they could basically sit back and say, you know what, we're going to live our life. If you want to come into ours and try to take us over and try to stop this rebellion, bring it on. So they basically dug in. They played more of a defensive war. And they forced the Union to conquer their land that they knew very well, 750,000 square miles of land. So this defensive strategy, like I said, they were okay with sitting back, protecting their new nation, whereas the North, the Union kind of had to go to them and say, okay, we are going to overthrow you. We are going to stop you. So a defensive strategy helps. Obviously, it's not going to help in the length of the war. It's going to just prolong it. But in terms of strategy, that was effective for the South. And also think about how that ties into railroads, right? That plays in perfectly with not having too much railroad. You don't have to push too far. You don't have to move too much. So then, that advantage that the North had of railroads won't come into effect as much if the South is kind of just staying put, because there might not be as much of a need for those railroads, right? It's still important. The South definitely had, it's tough to say definitely. I use the word definitely, but most historians will agree that the South had the upper hand in terms of the military leadership, in terms of the ability to lead in battle, in specific battle, not political leadership. I'm not talking about Lincoln. I'm talking about, military strategy, experience, that standpoint. Stonewall Jackson. I mean, there's tons of them, but one of the most famous ones was a man named Robert E. Lee. He was, a standout at West Point Academy. He wound up becoming the superintendent there. I mean, he was just a phenomenal military leader, military mind, and he was actually a great friend of Abraham Lincoln. And when the Civil War starts, Lincoln's sitting there and he asks Robert E. Lee, please lead my army. Please lead the Union Army. Unfortunately for Lincoln, Robert E. Lee was very loyal. He was from Virginia. Virginia was a slave state, and he says, you know what? Love you, Abe, and we're boys and everything, and I would love to support you, but I can't. I'm sorry. I'm going to stick by my state here. And even though Robert E. Lee actually opposed secession, he was against it. He said we should not secede. He was actually against slavery totally. Robert E. Lee, this amazing military mind, winds up leading the Confederacy, the Confederate Army, against Lincoln's wishes. Okay, and that's like a first pick in a draft. It's like picking LeBron James in like the first round or something like that. Like getting Robert E. Lee was like a big deal. So he advantage there goes to the South. Okay, they also have motivation. Some people argue that motivation is not an advantage, but I would argue that it is. If you're motivated to do something and you want something, you might succeed. I think you're going to probably succeed more than if you don't have that motivation or that drive or that need. So the South is motivated. New country, new way of life. We want this. Okay. So they go in guns a-blazing. The South had the home ground. They knew where they were going pretty much. It's a home court advantage right there. And then they had more of a skilled military culture, whereas the North is going to have to really train a lot of their troops. The South is as well, but advantage goes to the South here. Okay, so think to yourself, going into this war without taking out what you already know about the future coming up, who do you think has the advantage? The North with their population, with the industry, with railroads, with their navy and their already established government, or the South with their defensive strategy, their great leadership militarily, their motivation, the home, geographic advantage, and then that kind of those skilled soldiers in a military culture. Okay, so we're going to leave you here with Robert E. Lee. Those are pictures there of Mr. Robert E. Lee, the great, amazing military mind. And next class, we'll dive in. We'll talk about the troops, the soldiers, what they wore, the weapons they used, that type of stuff. So expect another video for Monday. And that's it. All right, have yourself a great Thursday. Have yourself an awesome weekend, guys. And we'll be in touch soon. Okay, talk to you soon, guys.